Thank you for the beautiful music that holds us in worship, and Frank, for your loving words. I'm beginning this sermon today the way I begin every memorial service and burial I have ever performed over 27 years. We come in love's name. Amen. A human life is sacred. It is sacred when it is born. It is sacred every day of its living. And it is sacred in its dying. I say these words, and many of you who have been to a number of my memorial services can attest you've heard these words over and over again, because life is sacred, and we cannot be reminded enough of this. Each life is sacred, and every day of that life, good and bad, of every life. I believe it. And more importantly than that, with each person I get to know, I keep learning it and relearning it. Each of you and everybody I meet and know their stories reaffirms this deep down. As I was speaking when the children were still here, I learned again and anew when I watched my little granddaughter using my mother's walker to learn to walk by pushing around. I realized close up and personal that while this was something that signified something about my mother, it also signified something about my granddaughter, and that I should never, ever judge worth by looking at ability or even potential. And we should never be judged by what we used to be or what we could be. We should be judged as worthy in this moment. And I'm asking my family, I have permission to tell your story? This is up close and personal. It's a lesson I've been learning in my family. I'm sorry. Kevin and Carl are my nephews, brave and kind, with lives as sacred as anyone's. Kevin and Carl have autism, and their lives and abilities are very different from many of us here. They have been a part of my life for 30 years, since they were infants, and I have learned to see them not for their symptoms, but for their inherent sacred humanity. They are precious in the eyes of God and in the eyes of those who love them. And they have taught me to look on other people who I maybe don't get to know intimately, but I don't know anything about them really, to honor people and to see them as sacred without judging them. They're lucky to have wonderful parents, my brother Eric and his wife Carol, who have helped transform our family to understand what love means. And I'm going to quote Eric, my brother, who was asked in his church service, they go to a congregational church downtown DC, once to speak on what it means to offer welcome to people in a congregation. Eric said, Kevin and Carl really like passing the peace. And that's what Christians call what we do when we ask everybody to greet the person near you. In Christian churches, they call it passing the peace. And Kevin and Carl really like that. So Eric said, give them a moment of your time. Kevin's greeting is usually subtle and quiet, while Carl favors a slow motion high five. So don't walk away too quickly, or you'll miss it. And then Eric said, like the old saying in the autism community, not being able to speak is not the same as having nothing to say. Well, that Sunday, and I'm not sure about other Sundays, but that Sunday, every single person in the church came over to pass the peace with Kevin and Carl, and greeting them in a way that honored them. And it was impressive. So I learned this close up and personal, and it makes me wonder, what would the world be like if everyone could offer that kind of welcome to everyone, no matter how different they seem? That acknowledgement of namaste, the divine in me sees the divine in you. Now, I'm sure that most people, like me, would agree that every life is sacred and every moment of its being is sacred. But like me, how many of us insert little qualifiers without even knowing it? Sacred, except when this is happening, or except for that. Who actually lives their lives insisting on and acting on this view of humanity? If people could do that, history would be so different, and what's going on right now in our nation and in the world would be so different. Unitarian Universalist is our first principle. We covenant to affirm and promote that every person has inherent worth and dignity. But you know, life is so varied and it's always transforming. So the worth we speak of, do we ever sort of anchor it on some ideal or some fixed point that then we measure it by that? Perhaps we think of worth as that ideal that might be in our heads without our even knowing it, like everything measured against a handsome 35-year-old able-bodied white man with a college degree. Every person has inherent worth at every stage of their transformations. Babies who can't walk or talk, yes, but also adults who can't walk or talk. Every person in every social condition. People who have documents, birth certificates, college degrees, passports, voting cards, and people who have been unable to acquire those documents. Every person, including the families that PFLAG helps, the families who are transforming as they adjust to the reality of a person's sexual orientation or gender identity and seek to support one another so that they can remember that each person in their family still is sacred, just the way they are. Every person. People who have jobs and those who don't. People everywhere, in schools, in prisons, in hospitals, in detention centers, in Congress, in the desert starving. All people have worth and all lives are sacred. Every person, victims of poison gases in Syria, and Syrian families standing at our borders seeking refuge. What would our world be like if everyone saw everyone as sacred? Right now, I've got to tell you, I'm scared that the current thinking in our government's leadership might dehumanize many people I see as sacred and see them lesser in their policies. The breaking news I read this morning is that our Attorney General wants to retain or restore mandatory sentences to recriminalize drug use and reinforce the Jim Crow policies that have incarcerated a huge proportion of the African American population for just minor charges. That scares me. And for my own family, the efforts to redo affordable health care includes a threat to rob my nephews, Kevin and Carl, of the support they rely on, some very basic assistance to live lives of dignity and safety, offered now by current Medicare and Medicaid programs. How can there be talk of dismantling what little protections we have put in place? Don't those people in government know anyone who's been thrown in jail for 30 years for stealing something that was only worth a couple $100s? Have they ever met a person who is elderly and lives without a pension and is scared of outliving their financial resources? Do they know anyone who has special physical or mental needs, or anyone who cannot access wealth in order to have their basic needs met? I don't know really what these leaders are thinking in their hearts. I don't really know how to read their minds. All I know is what they say and what their policies could do. If every life is sacred, that means one thing to me. But perhaps they only think some people have merit or some people have worth. After all, our president has called for a merit-based immigration system, one that puts a priority on skills and employability over family ties or adverse conditions threatening lives in their birth nations. A merit system. That doesn't even make sense to me. How can you judge merit? Who gets to set the standards? I depend upon those immigrants who are filling jobs that I need, like the farm workers to make sure I have food, or the loving caregivers in my mother's nursing home. But even more than that, even if I can't find the merit, their lives are still sacred. And so every life has merit if you judge it in the eyes of God. Through all the transformations and all the sacred shifts we experience, how can we decide some are in and some are out? Our world is at a threshold, a fork in the road. It's time for us to seek transformation in ourselves and in our community, because what we choose is going to make a difference. In the place of our global climate crisis, some people choose complacency to deny or ignore. But others are working to transform our responses to the crisis our climate brings to us. What we choose may be a choice between evolution or ultimately extinction. And by the same light, I think that our response to living in this diverse, multicultural, multi-abled, multi-generational, multi-faith world community is also something that we do not dare ignore or fall back on our habitual patterns of complacency and just hoping everybody will get along. We are at a crossroads. Either we evolve how we are with human community, or we may be ending up extinct. All of us need all of us to make it. All the isms that afflict our world are actually holding us. We are being held trapped in a prison. We're at war with ourselves, we're at war with our neighbors. And the isms like sexism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, ethnocentrism, nationalism, name-your-own-ism, and racism, how much have they been hurting us? Racism. We've been working on the pledge this year here at this church. The pledge, which started in Birmingham, Alabama, and hundreds of thousands have signed it. We've had so many people here at USA sign it. We ordered a second banner, so if you haven't signed the pledge yet, there's room now on the second banner to put your name. Part of the lines of the pledge are, I believe that every person has worth as an individual. I believe that every person is entitled to dignity and respect regardless of race or color. I believe that every thought and every act of racial prejudice is harmful. If it is my thought or act, then it is harmful to me as well as to others. And then after you sign the pledge, you can look for the trainings or the workshops we offer to give people techniques to actually practice how to dismantle this habitual dishonoring that we fall into without even knowing it. We need to be taught to live the way we say we believe. And so we human beings are at a crossroads. This is a time for us to decide, are we here to care for one another, to share and support one another in all our variations? Or are we just measuring ourselves and others against some notion that merit only goes to the fittest, the smartest, the richest? There are people that say that's their philosophy. Can we have the moral courage to face the ways we have seen ourselves and others as less than sacred? Can we have that moral courage to face that in ourselves? And then, can we learn to love ourselves and others enough to do the work to transform. This is the choice. This is the fork in the road. It's a threshold. Do we stay trapped in an isolationist resistance to transformation, or do we open ourselves, free ourselves to a journey of joining in the creative ongoing process of the world becoming? Can our faith live out the truth that all of us need all of us to make it? Tomorrow evening, Jewish people will begin the observance of the Passover, remembering that time of transformation, sacred shifts for their ancestors, shifts when they moved from slavery to freedom, from living in exile in Egypt to wandering lost in a desert following a guy named Moses, to finally finding a way home. And Christians today, all around the world, are observing the beginning of the Holy Week. Today is Palm Sunday, the day that Jesus traveled into Jerusalem. He was there to celebrate the Passover with his disciples. He was there to bear witness to what he believed, that every person's life is sacred and all are children of a loving God. And then in that Holy Week, his life went through major transformation as he was betrayed and crucified, and some say arose. His life was transformed, and everyone else. April 2017, it's a holy week. It's a week of Passover because so much is transforming. The seeds that we've planted remind us of that, and the trees blooming forth now. And our nation and the world are undergoing deep and major shifts in our politics, our sense of the world community, and our denomination. The Unitarian Universalist Association is going through a sacred shift. For those of you not aware of it, in the last 2 weeks, our president, Peter Morales, and 2 other senior staff leaders have all resigned. They resigned after a controversy over hiring practices at the UUA. The controversy was whether or not we are really living up to our denominational commitment to be inclusive of people of color in senior positions. It's a sudden earthquake in our system, but it has signaled the urgency for our denomination to engage in deep transformation work. It's soul work. It's not easy and it's causing pain, but it is needed work. And here is my time of personal privilege. Thank you, Frank. Here at UUCA, you are headed for a wonderful, powerful transformation. On March 23rd, a letter went out from me announcing that I will be leaving this congregation the end of June. I love you and I will miss you. But this is a great time of transformation, not only for the congregation, but for me in my life. I have so appreciated the words of support and good wishes that some of you have sent me. You give me faith that I still will have worth and dignity, even when I leave you, and that whatever ministry I move on to will be a place I will have value. Thank you so much for offering me that affirmation of your faith. So this is what I want you to hear on this April Sunday. Through all the ages and stages of our lives, each of us is sacred. Our lives have worth and dignity in our infancy and as we approach the endings of our lives, in our successful and happy times, and in those times we feel discouraged and let down. I see your sacred inherent essence. I see it in you. I see it in the crying, biting kid that everybody calls the bad kid. I see it in the 92-year-old who can't remember what day it is, who needs help getting out of bed. I see it in the happy newlyweds and in the heartbroken folks who have come to divorce. I see it in the scared immigrant dreamer youth and in the passion of a Black Lives Matter protester. I see the sacred in each of you, and I believe that when we see the sacred in each other, we can then offer each other compassion. Compassion for self, for others, and for every stage of transformation. The good, the bad, the ugly, the hard, the happy, all of it is sacred. And so, on this day, I ask you to offer a generous, open heart, first to yourself, and then to others, whatever their ability, their imperfection, their identity, their stage of becoming or changing. All of it is holy. Offer your heart. And when we can open our arms to the transformation, then we will discover the freedom to be as sacred as we are. We will be able to walk through the parted waters of the Red Sea. We will be able to give thanks for the loud hosannas, even as we know we are moving towards our crucifixion. We will be able to break the chains of whatever isms have been holding us back from being as loving as we can be. I think many people are hard on other people because they themselves don't understand that they are sacred. Maybe if each of us could believe it of ourselves, then we could help others see that they are sacred too. And that is why we need each of us and everyone here to be in it together, because that would be a transformation worth singing about.